My phone buzzed at 9:40 at night on Father's Day, and it was a text from my daughter's mother. She had never texted me that late in 11 years. I opened it, standing in my own kitchen, still holding the card my daughter had given me that morning. The text said, "He's not even your kid. You just didn't know." I read it 3 times. I did not text back. I set an alarm for 6 a.m. and drove to the courthouse before I had even made coffee. I appreciate you being here with me for this one. Before we begin, leave me a comment. Have you ever discovered something about your family that changed the way you saw everything before it? Yes or no is enough. I read every one. A quick note of some details in this story are fictionalized for narrative depth. The lesson at its core is what I hope stays with you. I have sent that woman $1,082,400 over 11 years, and I found out what I actually paid for on Father's Day, sitting in my own living room. Because she sent a text to the wrong person. My name is Garrison Holbrook. I am 43 years old. I own a fire sprinkler installation company in Phoenix that employs 38 people. I say that not because it matters to you yet, but because it mattered to the story. Because a man who builds a company from a single truck and a helper he found on a Craigslist is a man who pays attention to numbers. Numbers are what I do. I read blueprints. I calculate pipe runs. I bid jobs to the quarter inch, and I have not missed a margin target in 6 years. I tell you this so you understand that when I say I sent that woman $8,200 a month for 11 years, I am not estimating. I know exactly what I sent, because I set up the wire myself, and I watched it leave my account on the 1st of every month, like a heartbeat I could not stop. $8,200. Every month. For 11 years. Plus the private school tuition I paid directly to the registrar. Plus the medical and dental insurance I carried on my policy, because Lorraine said her employer plan had a gap. Plus the vehicle in her name that I made payments on because she said she needed reliable transportation to get our daughter to school. I never once asked for a receipt. I never once asked to see a bank statement. I never once drove to that house on a Tuesday to see if the lights were on and the refrigerator was full. I sent the money, and I believed that sending the money was the same thing as being a father. If somebody has ever told you that you were nothing but a deposit slip with a pulse, stay with me. Because that is what I was. I just did not know it yet. I was sitting in my living room on Father's Day evening. The house was quiet. It is always quiet. I live alone in a 3-bedroom in a subdivision near South Mountain, and the only sound after 9 o'clock is the air conditioner cycling on and off, and the occasional dog 2 streets over that barks at coyotes. I had eaten a steak I grilled myself. I had watched 20 minutes of a baseball game I did not care about. My daughter Alara was at her mother's house because that is where she lived, and I saw her every other weekend and 2 weeks in the summer. And I had stopped asking myself whether that was enough, because asking that question never changed the answer. My phone buzzed on the arm of the chair at 9:14 p.m. I picked it up the way you pick up a phone when you are not expecting anything: loose hand, half attention, one eye still on the game. The text was from Lorraine. I read it. Then I read it again. Then I read it a 3rd time, slowly. The way you read a contract clause that changes the price of everything above it. The text was not meant for me. That is the thing about a text. It does not care what day it is. It does not care that you grilled a steak alone and watched a game you did not care about and told yourself that the empty chair across the table was a choice and not a consequence. A text goes where it is sent, and it says what it says, and it does not flinch. She was not confessing. That is what I need you to understand. She was not unburdening herself on a guilty night. She was reminding somebody of a fact the way you remind somebody to pick up milk. The words were plain and careless, and they carried the weight of something said so many times it had lost its edges. She mentioned my daughter. She mentioned paternity. She mentioned it as settled business, old news between 2 people who had known the truth for longer than I'd been paying for the lie. I set the phone face down on the arm of the chair. The leather was warm from where my hand had been. The air conditioner hummed. The dog 2 streets over barked once and stopped. The house was exactly as quiet as it had been 30 seconds earlier, and everything inside it was different. I did not pick the phone up again for 11 minutes. Not because I needed to think about what it said. I understood what it said. I understood it the way you understand a load calculation that comes back wrong instantly. Completely. With the knowledge that everything built on top of it has to come down. I sat there for 11 minutes because I needed to decide what kind of man was going to stand up out of that chair. The man who stood up out of that chair did not call Lorraine. He did not call his mother. He did not call a lawyer. I want you to understand that the reason was not strength. It was arithmetic. I have been estimating commercial jobs for 20 years. Estimating is not adding. It is reading 400 lines on a bid sheet and knowing which one is the line that will eat you alive if you get it wrong. It is the discipline of not reacting to the first number that scares you, but sitting with it until you understand what it connects to. And that is what I did that night with my own life. I sat with it. I did not react. I calculated. I made a pot of coffee at 4 in the morning and did not drink it. The smell filled the kitchen and sat there like another presence in the house, something warm that nobody wanted. I walked through the hallway in bare feet on cold tile, and I stopped at Alara's bedroom door. She was not there. She was 26 minutes away at her mother's house, asleep in a room I had never seen, in a bed I did not buy, under a roof that my money paid for every month without fail. I stood in front of that closed door and I looked at the drawing she had taped to the fridge when she was 7. A house with a triangle roof and 2 stick figures holding hands and a sun in the corner that had a face. She had written Dad on the taller stick figure in purple marker. The tape had yellowed. The paper had curled at the edges. I had walked past that drawing 1,000 times and never once thought about what it meant that she drew it here, in this house, and not at her mother's. I opened the cabinet above the stove and looked at the cartoon cup. A plastic cup with a penguin on it. She had picked out at a dollar store when she was 4. I had kept it because she reached for it every weekend without asking. I closed the cabinet and stood in the kitchen, and I made the first decision. I was not going to call Lorraine. A man who calls at midnight is a man who has lost control of something. And whatever I had lost that night, I was not going to lose control on top of it. The second decision came at 5 in the morning, when the sky outside the kitchen window turned gray, and then pale, and then the color of a permit form. I was going to the courthouse. Not to a lawyer, not yet. I needed to understand what I had signed before I paid someone to explain it to me. Estimating is not adding. It is knowing which of 400 lines is the one that will eat you alive. And that night, walking my own hallway at 3 in the morning, past a drawing my daughter made when she was 7, I identified the line. It was a piece of paper I signed in a hospital 11 years ago. I signed it because a woman I trusted handed it to me and said it was routine. I signed it the way you sign a waiver at a dentist's office, without reading, without thinking. Because the person handing it to you is someone you believe would not hand you something that could destroy you. Have you ever driven to a government building at 8 in the morning to find out whether your own daughter is legally yours? I have. I drove the 101 in Monday traffic with both hands on the wheel and the radio off, and I parked in the garage at the Maricopa County Superior Court, and I walked into the records office at 8:15, and I said to the woman behind the counter that I signed a document in a hospital 11 years ago, and I needed to know what it meant. She typed for a while. She asked me for a date of birth and a case number I did not have. She found the file anyway. She pulled it up on her screen and read it silently. And then she looked at me the way people look at a man who has just realized he is standing in a building he should have visited a long time ago. "Sir," she said, "you need to talk to a family law attorney about this. This is not a simple document." I thanked her, and I walked out of that building holding nothing except a case number I had written on the back of a gas receipt. Her voice stayed with me all the way to the parking garage. Not what she said, the way she said it. like a person who has seen a man walk into that office before, holding the same confusion and the same fear, and who knows exactly what happens next. What happened next is I did what the clerk told me to do. I called the only family law attorney I had ever used, the woman who had handled my custody arrangement a decade ago, and I sat in her office on a Tuesday morning while she told me that the worst mistake of my life was also the only thing keeping me alive. Colleen Farrell was 56 years old, a family law attorney who had been practicing in Maricopa County for 24 years, and who spoke to judges the way mechanics speak to engines, with the calm of someone who understood exactly what was broken and exactly what it would cost to fix. I had used her for the original custody filing when Alara was a toddler. She had gotten me every other weekend and 2 weeks in summer, and I had thanked her and written the check and never called again. I should have called again. Her office was on Scottsdale Road, second floor. A conference room with a single window that looked out onto a parking lot and a dry landscaping strip that nobody watered. The carpet was new. The paper on her desk was not. She sat across from me, and I told her everything. The text, the night, the courthouse, the case number on a gas receipt I was still carrying in my pocket. Like a man carrying a grenade he does not know how to put down. Colleen did not react to the betrayal. She did not say she was sorry. She did not shake her head. She tapped her pen once on the table and said, "Tell me about the affidavit." I told her I signed it in the hospital the day Alara was born. She asked me if I read it. I said no. She asked me if anyone explained what it meant. I said Lorraine told me it was routine. Colleen nodded once and pulled a manila folder from the drawer behind her and opened it and did not look up for a long time. "I want you to hear this number, 60 days. That is the rescission window on an affidavit of parentage in Arizona. 60 days to change your mind, to contest, to say I did not understand what I was signing. I signed that paper 11 years ago." The window to undo it closed before Alara could hold her own head up. And what Colleen told me next is the part that changed the shape of everything. She said, "That affidavit has the legal force of a court order of paternity. As far as Arizona law is concerned, you are Alara's father, period. Not probably, not presumptively. You are her father the same way you would be if a judge had ordered a test and the test came back positive and the court entered a decree. That piece of paper you signed at 4 in the morning without reading it is the reason you have rights to that child today." I sat with that. I sat with the fact that a document I had treated like a hospital receipt, like a form you sign between the birth certificate and the insurance card, was the single most powerful legal instrument in my life. It was the reason I had custody weekends. It was the reason I could enroll her in school. It was the reason I was her father in the eyes of the state. Regardless of what a DNA test would say. That is what nobody tells you about a piece of paper you sign in a hospital room at 4 in the morning. It does not expire. It does not care what you meant. It is what it is until a judge says otherwise. Then Colleen said the part that put weight back on my chest. She said, "The question is not whether you are her father. The law already answered that. The question is whether you want to stay her father with every other weekend, or whether you want to be the parent that child lives with." I said, "I did not think that was available to me," she said. "On what you have today, it is not. Not yet." She let that sit. Then she said, "Before you do anything else, understand this. If you are not her legal father, you have no right to see her, not reduced, not supervised, nothing. That order disappears, and you become a stranger to an 11-year-old girl." Colleen looked at me across that table and said, "The person with the strongest claim to challenge this affidavit is the mother. But she cannot challenge it. And the reason she cannot is the reason you are going to win. If you do exactly what I tell you, and nothing else." I asked her what she meant. She leaned forward and said, "I will explain that part after you answer one question. What do you want to do next?" I told Colleen what I wanted to do next. I said, I want to keep daughter. She nodded like that was the only answer that mattered, and the only one that was going to cost me everything. Then she said, "Good. Now let me tell you how." But before I tell you what Colleen said after that, I need to tell you about the photograph. Because the photograph is the thing I kept going back to in her office and in every room after it. There is a picture of me holding Alara at about 4 minutes old. My face in it does not look like my face. It looks like a man who has just been handed something he did not know he was missing. She was wrapped in a hospital blanket that was white with blue stripes, and she weighed 6 pounds 11 ounces, and she had not opened her eyes yet. The room smelled like antiseptic and something else underneath it. Something warm, an animal, and new. I remember the fluorescent lights above the bed, and I remember the nurse who brought her to me. And I remember Lorraine lying on the bed watching me hold her with an expression I thought was exhaustion. I think about that expression now, and I am not sure it was exhaustion. I think it might have been something else. 6 hours after that photograph, a woman from the hospital brought in a form. She said it was the affidavit of parentage. She said it was routine. She said I should sign it, so my name would go on the birth certificate. I signed it the way you sign a hotel register. I did not read the title. I did not read the body. I wrote my name because a woman in scrubs told me to, and because I was holding my daughter, and because I had no reason in the world to hesitate. Lorraine signed it standing right next to me. A notary witnessed both signatures. The form went to Vital Records. My name went on the birth certificate. And Lorraine Prescott, 38 years old, sharp-featured, worked billing at a dental office in Tempe with the kind of efficiency that made you think she never lost track of a number, stood there and watched me sign a document, declaring myself the father of a child she knew was not mine. She signed her name underneath mine. She watched the notary stamp it. She said nothing. I have thought about those 6 hours more than I have thought about almost anything else in my life. Not because of what I did, because of what she watched me do and said nothing. She stood in that room and let a man who had just become the happiest version of himself write his name on a lie. And she did not flinch. That is not a mistake. That is not confusion. That is a decision made with both eyes open. In a hospital room that smelled like bleach and new skin, 6 hours after the child was born, back in the present, late June. I needed to call Lorraine because Colleen had told me the most important thing I could do right now was act normal. Do not confront. Do not investigate. Be the father you have always been and pay attention to what you see. So I called. I asked how Alara was doing. I asked what she needed for summer. I asked if she wanted to come over for the 4th of July a day early. My voice was steady because I had been rehearsing steady since the courthouse parking garage. Every word I said was true. Every word I said was a mask over the thing I could not say. Calling the woman who lied to you for 11 years and pretending you do not know is a particular kind of performance. It is not acting. It is estimating. You are calculating the weight of every syllable before it leaves your mouth. And I know how to estimate. Lorraine answered my questions the way she always did, short, efficient, pleasant enough. But near the end of the call, she paused. She said, "You have called 3 times this week. That is not like you," I said. "Just missing her, that is all." There was a silence on her end that lasted about 2 seconds longer than it should have. Then she said, "Okay." That okay had a seam in it. I could hear it. The way a pipe joint looks fine from the outside, but you tap it and the sound comes back wrong. She was not suspicious yet, but she was aware. And aware is the step before suspicious, the way smoke is the step before fire. I hung up and stood in my kitchen, and the thing that stayed with me was not the lie. It was the okay. Because a woman who says okay like that is a woman who is already counting something in her head, and I needed to be faster than whatever she was counting. So I moved faster. The next morning I drove 40 minutes west to Sun City to see my mother. Because before I did anything else, I needed to hear one thing from one person who had never lied to me in my life. My mother. Leona Holbrook was 71 years old, a retired elementary school teacher who had never once raised her voice at a child or lowered her standards for an adult. She lived alone in a small house with a garden she kept perfect and a screen door that closed behind her like punctuation. I sat on the concrete bench in her backyard in the late afternoon shade with a glass of water I did not drink, and I asked her a question with no lead-up. Mama, if a person found out a child was not theirs, what would you think of them if they stayed? She looked at me. She did not ask what test. She did not ask when. She did not ask me to explain or to slow down or to start from the beginning. She answered as if the question was 11 years old and she had been waiting for me to ask it. Is this about Alara? She said. I said, I am asking a question. She said, I have had that girl 1 weekend a month since she could walk, and I do not need a test to tell me she is mine. You can do whatever you want with that. Then she said goodnight and walked inside. The screen door closed behind her with a single clean sound. She has never done that before or since, ended a conversation, by leaving me in her garden with a glass of water and no room to argue. She gave me the answer, and she gave me the silence to sit with it, and she trusted me to do the right thing with both. That is my mother. One sentence and a screen door. That is all she has ever needed. I sat in that garden for 20 minutes. The sage smelled warm and dry, and the concrete was still holding the heat of the afternoon. I did not cry. I have not cried through any of this, and I am not going to pretend that makes me strong. It makes me the kind of man who processes things by sitting still until the processing is done. That is not strength. That is wiring. 2 days later, I was back in Colleen's office. Same conference room. Same window onto Scottsdale Road. Same manila folder. Thicker now. She sat across from me and laid down the rule that would govern everything from that point forward. No private investigator, she said. No following Lorraine. No pulling credit reports, no checking her social media. Nothing that a judge could look at and say, this man was building a case against the mother of his child. I said. Then how do I find out what is going on? She said. You do not find out. You pay attention. There is a difference. And judges can see it in about 4 seconds. She explained. If I investigated, every hearing would be about my methods. If I simply started doing the things a legal parent is entitled to do, requesting school records, reviewing medical files, checking attendance, no one could question it. I was on the birth certificate. I had every right to access those records. The fact that I had never once exercised that right in 11 years was not something she said out loud. But it sat between us on that table like a third person in the room. 11 years on a birth certificate. And I had never once asked for a login to the school portal. Do you understand what kind of father that makes me? I sent the money. I showed up on scheduled weekends. I bought the birthday presents, and I attended the school plays, and I drove her back on Sunday evenings, and I told myself that the check I wrote every month was proof that I cared. It was not proof. It was a substitute. And the difference between proof and substitute is the difference between a father who knows what is happening in his daughter's life and a father who sends money and hopes. I called the school the next morning. A woman in the front office asked for my name, my relationship to the student, and whether I was listed on the birth certificate. I said yes to all 3. She sent me a portal link by email. The whole thing took 11 minutes. 11 minutes to get access to something I had been entitled to for 11 years and had never once requested. I sat at my kitchen table and opened the link and typed in the temporary password and looked at my daughter's school record for the first time. What I found on that screen is what started everything that came after. The school file was 62 pages long. Most of it was nothing immunization records, a hearing screening from 2nd grade, 2 teacher comments about how Alara was a pleasure to have in class. I sat at my kitchen table on a Tuesday night with the laptop open and a beer I never finished, and I read it the way I read a bid. page by page, line by line, because that is the only way I know how to read anything. And because Colleen had told me to pay attention. And paying attention starts with reading what is in front of you. Page 38 is where it stopped being nothing. The attendance summary for the current academic year was laid out in a grid dates on the left, codes on the right. A for absent, T for tardy, E for excused. The codes ran down the page in clusters that got denser as the months went on. I counted them. 37. 37 absences and tardies in one academic year. Some excused, most not. Some in clusters of 3 and 4 days in a row. One stretch in March where she missed an entire week and came back on a Monday with no note in the file. I read that number 4 times. I had never seen it because I had never looked. The notifications went to the parent listed as primary contact, which was Lorraine. And I was not listed as primary because I had never asked to be. I had been on the birth certificate for 11 years, and I had never once requested primary contact status at my daughter's school. I sent the money. I assumed the money meant everything was fine. The money did not mean everything was fine. The money meant I did not have to check. 37 times. I want you to sit with that number the way I sat with it. Because I had been sending a check every month to that house and I did not know my daughter had missed 37 days of school. I did not know because I never asked. I never asked because asking would have meant admitting that sending the check was not the same as being there. And admitting that would have meant looking at myself in a way I was not prepared to look. I kept reading. Passed the grades, mostly B's, a few C's, 1 D in science that nobody flagged. Passed the standardized test scores that meant nothing to me. Passed a disciplinary note from October about Ilara falling asleep in class 3 times in 1 week. Falling asleep. My daughter was falling asleep in class, and nobody called me. Nobody called me because I was not the contact they called. Then I got to page 54, the emergency contact section. The primary contact was Lorraine, her cell number, her work number at the dental office, her home address in Tempe. Standard, expected. Below that was the secondary emergency contact. I read it, and I read it again, and I felt something shift in my chest the way you feel a foundation shift when you are standing on it. Not a crack, not a collapse. Just a movement that tells you something underneath is not where it was. The secondary emergency contact was not me. It was a name I had never heard. A man's name. Listed with a local phone number and 2 words in the relationship field, family friend. A family friend. That is what it said. 2 words on a school form that had been sitting in a database for at least 2 years while I was in Chandler looking at condensate lines and pipe racks. A man I had never met, whose name I had never heard Lorraine say, whose phone number I did not recognize, was the person the school would call if something happened to my daughter and her mother could not be reached. Not me, not my mother, not Wade. A family friend. I closed the laptop. The kitchen was quiet. The beer was warm. The refrigerator hummed the way it always does, steady and indifferent. The sound of a house that does not know what just happened inside it. The name meant nothing to me. I had no context for it, no memory of Lorraine ever mentioning it, no frame to put it in. But a man whose name is on your daughter's school file as an emergency contact is not a stranger to your daughter. He is a person who has been close enough to that house and to that child to be trusted with a phone call if something goes wrong. He is a person who has been in that life long enough and deep enough for Lorraine to write his name on a form and hand it to a school secretary. And I did not know he existed. I did not search the name. I did not call the number. I did what Colleen told me to do. I exercised my rights as the parent on the birth certificate, and I requested the full attendance record going back 2 years. That call took 4 minutes. The record arrived by email 4 days later. I want to describe what I actually was, because it took that record to make me see it. The full report was worse than the portal summary. The first year showed scattered absences, a day here, 2 days there. The kind of pattern that looks like normal childhood illness if you are not paying attention. But by the second year, the pattern had changed. Clusters appeared. 3 days in a row in November. A full week in January with no note filed. By March and April of the most recent semester, more than half the school days showed an absence or a tardy. Not a spike, a slope. My daughter's attendance had been eroding for 2 years, the way a foundation erodes slowly, invisibly, until the cracks show up in a place you cannot ignore. I sat at my kitchen table with the printout spread across the surface, and I went through it line by line. The July heat pressed against the window glass and the house was quiet. And I read those numbers the way I read a bid that has gone wrong, not looking for the mistake. Looking for the pattern that explains the mistake. The pattern was clear. It was getting worse. And nobody had told me because nobody was required to tell me because I was not the primary contact, because I had never asked to be. I want you to sit with that for a second. Because I have. A man holding a document that says his child missed more school than she attended in the last 2 months. And his first instinct was to call the person responsible for it and ask her to explain it away. That is what I did. I called Lorraine. I kept my voice steady. I asked about the absences the way Colleen had instructed, as a concerned parent, not an interrogator. I said I had been looking at the school portal and noticed Alara had missed some days and I wanted to make sure everything was all right. Lorraine answered without hesitation. She said there had been a stretch in the winter where the car had trouble and she could not get Alara to school on time. She said there was a bad flu at the school in March and half the class was out. She said Alara had a sensitive stomach and sometimes she just needed a day. Her voice was casual and rehearsed. The way a voice is rehearsed when the person speaking has said the same thing to herself enough times to believe it. I said, "Okay," and I hung up. Sending money is the part you can do from Chandler. It is the part that does not require you to look at your daughter's school record, or count the days she was not in a classroom, or ask yourself where she was on those days and who she was with. Sending money is the part that lets you believe you are doing enough, because the number is large enough to feel like enough. I had been doing that for 11 years. I had turned fatherhood into a wire transfer, and I had convinced myself it was generosity, when it was actually the opposite. It was the price I paid to not be present. It was the cost of every Tuesday I did not drive to Tempe, every Wednesday I did not check, every Thursday I did not ask. Here is what I actually was. I was a man who had bought his way out of the hard part and had told himself the receipt was proof of love. It was not. It was proof of distance. And the distance had cost my daughter 37 days of school in 1 year while I was in Chandler running pipe and writing bids and believing that the check made everything fine. I hung up the phone and set it face down on the table next to the printout. The heat came through the window and the house was still. And I thought about what Colleen had said, that I should start paying attention, the way a present father pays attention. And I realized the question was not what Lorraine had been hiding from me. The question was what I had been hiding from myself for 11 years by writing a number on a check every month and calling it love. The next custody weekend was 10 days away. And for the first time in 11 years, I was going to use it for something other than going through the motions. The next Friday, I drove to Lorraine's house to pick up Alara for the weekend. And for the first time in 11 years, I looked at my daughter instead of just collecting her. She came out the front door with a backpack over one shoulder. Alara Holbrook was 11 years old, small for her age, with a habit of organizing things in rows that she had picked up from watching me work. She got in the truck and pulled the door shut gently and set the backpack between her feet and said nothing. I used to fill this silence with the radio. This time, I did not. I asked her what she had for dinner last night. She said, "I don't remember." I asked her what she had for lunch. She said, "Can we listen to music?" I asked her if she finished the book she told me about last time, the one about the girl who trains horses. She shrugged and looked out the window and said, "I don't know, maybe." Every answer was a door closing. Not slammed, just eased shut. The way a child closes a door when she does not want to wake someone up. She was not being rude. She was being careful. And careful is not a thing an 11-year-old should need to be with her father in a truck on a Friday evening. How many weekends had I picked up this child and driven her to my house and fed her and driven her back and never once asked a question that required more than a one-word answer? How many Fridays had I accepted fine and good and I don't know as the full picture of her life? I had treated these weekends like a delivery route. Pick up. Drop off. Send the check. Repeat. I had not been parenting. I had been transporting. At my house, she went straight to the guest room and set her backpack on the bed and began unpacking. She lined up her things in a row along the edge of the mattress. Toothbrush, a folded t-shirt, a hairbrush, a small stuffed animal she has had since she was 3. She arranged them by size, left to right, the way I arrange tools on a workbench. She got that from watching me. Not from my blood, from my hands. I stood in the doorway and watched her do it, and something in my chest pulled tight. At bedtime, I asked her if she wanted the door open or closed. She said, "Closed." Then she said something else, quietly, almost as an afterthought. "Nobody comes in here at night." She said it the way you say the sky is blue, like it was a fact about the world that did not need explaining, like she was noting a feature of the room the way you might note that it had a window or a ceiling fan. She was not afraid when she said it. She was relieved. There are things you cannot unhear. A child telling you that nobody comes into her room at night is one of them. Because the only reason a child says that is if she knows what it means when somebody does. I did not ask what she meant. I should have. But there are sentences a child says that stop you the way a hand on your chest stops you. And you stand there, and you do not move, because you are afraid that if you move the wrong way, you will break something that is already almost broken. I closed the door. I stood in the hallway for a long time. I could hear her through the wall, arranging something, the pillows, probably lining them up the way she lines up everything, left to right by size. Then silence. Then the small sound of a child breathing, the way a child breathes when she feels safe enough to fall asleep in under 5 minutes. I went to the front door to lock up. Her shoes were by the mat. Canvas sneakers, faded, the kind you buy at a discount store. I picked them up because one of them was on its side, and I am the kind of person who straightens things. The sole was worn flat. Both seams had split along the outside edge. I turned one over and looked at the size printed inside the heel. Then I looked again. My daughter was 11 years old. These shoes were a size meant for a child of 8. The canvas had cut into the skin along both sides of her feet. I had seen the marks when she took them off. Red lines pressed into her skin like seams on a mold. I sent thousands of dollars a month to that house. And my daughter's feet were bleeding because her shoes did not fit, and nobody had bought her new ones. I put the shoes back by the door. I did not throw them away. I did not buy new ones that night. I photographed them front, back, sole, size tag. The red marks on Ilara's feet I had seen when she kicked them off. I dated the photographs and I saved them to a folder on my phone that I had created that week called Records. Then I went to bed and did not sleep. I told Wade on a Tuesday. Between a pipe rack and a condensate line. Because there is no good place to say a thing like that, and a job site is at least honest. Wade Pennington was 45, my foreman for 9 years. A man who could thread a 2-inch pipe in the dark and who had never once in nearly a decade asked me a personal question I did not invite. He was the closest thing I had to a brother, and the only person besides Colleen and my mother who I trusted with anything that mattered. I told him all of it. The text, the affidavit, the attendance record, the name on the emergency contact form I did not recognize, the shoes, the thing Ilara said about nobody coming into her room. I told him standing in the sun next to a galvanized pipe rack with the smell of copper flux and sweat in the air. And he listened without interrupting, the way a man listens when he knows that the person talking needs to finish before he can breathe. When I was done, he was quiet for about 10 seconds. Then he said, "What are you going to do if the test says what you think it says?" I did not answer. He nodded like that was the only honest answer there was. Let me tell you what a good friend does when you tell him something like that. He does not fix it. He does not judge it. He does not tell you what he would do because he has never been where you are standing, and he knows it. He asks you the one question you have been avoiding, and then he hands you a wrench and goes back to work. That is what Wade did. He said, "You need to know," and that was it. We went back to work. We did not talk about it again that day. We did not need to. I had ordered the DNA kit 3 days earlier. $49 online. That is what it costs to find out whether the last 11 years of your life were built on a lie. Less than a decent pair of shoes. Which, as it turned out, was also more than my daughter had. The kit arrived in a plain white box, with instructions that were simpler than I expected. 2 swabs, 2 vials, a prepaid envelope. I put it in the kitchen drawer and I left it there until the evening after I talked to Wade. Because I needed someone else to know what I was about to do before I did it. I needed a witness. Even if the witness was just a man on a job site who nodded and handed me a wrench. That evening, I stood in my kitchen and looked at the cup on the counter. The penguin cup. Elara had picked it out at a dollar store when she was 4 years old. It had a cartoon penguin with a painted smile and a scarf that was peeling off. I had kept it in the cabinet for 7 years because she reached for it every weekend without asking. It was still on the counter from the visit, unwashed, with a faint ring of juice dried on the inside. I will not pretend I did not know what I was doing. I opened the kit. I took out the swab. I ran it along the rim of the cup where her mouth had been. I sealed it in the vial and labeled it the way the instructions said, and I put it in the prepaid envelope, and I sealed that too. I swabbed the rim of my daughter's cup like a man collecting evidence against his own life. I knew it was underhanded. I knew that a better man might have asked her. I knew that there was no version of this that did not involve taking something from a child who did not know she was giving it. I did it anyway, because knowing was no longer optional. It had stopped being optional the night she told me nobody comes into her room. I set the sealed envelope on the counter next to the cup. The penguin stared up at me with that stupid, painted smile. My daughter had held this cup 1,000 times. I stood there for a long time, not moving. Because once I mailed that envelope, I could not unmake whatever came back. I mailed the kit on a Wednesday morning. I dropped it in the blue box outside the post office on Chandler Boulevard at 7:40 a.m. on my way to a job site. And for 9 days after that, I became 2 people. One of them ran a company. The other one waited. The one who ran the company did site walks and reviewed submittals and sat in a Tuesday client meeting in a conference room in Scottsdale where a father and his daughter crossed the parking lot outside the window, and I watched them until the client asked me if I had a question about the spec. I said no. I did not have a question about the spec. I had a question about everything else. The one who waited checked his email 17 times a day. He checked it on the job site. He checked it in his truck. He checked it at 2 in the morning, standing in his kitchen in the dark, with the phone screen lighting up his face like a man praying to something that was not going to answer. Wade asked me once during those 9 days if I was all right. I said I was fine. He did not ask again because he knew what I was waiting for, and he knew that fine meant alive and nothing more. I did the math again, on a napkin, at lunch on the 4th day. Ilara's birthday. The timeline of when Lorraine and I were together. The months that overlapped, and the month that did not. I had done this arithmetic 4 times already. The math never changed. I kept doing it because I wanted it to change. I wanted one of those numbers to shift by a week. By 3 days. By anything that would let me believe the test was going to come back the way I needed it to. But the numbers sat there on the napkin the way numbers always do, patient and indifferent, and exactly the same every time you add them. 9 days is not a long time. You can wait 9 days for a part to ship, for concrete to cure, for a permit to come back from the county. But 9 days waiting to find out whether your daughter is not 9 days. It is 1 day lived 9 times. The same morning, the same drive, the same check of the phone, the same silence from the inbox, the same lying down at night with the ceiling above you and the question below you, and nothing between them but the sound of the air conditioner doing the only job in the house that still made sense. I realized something during those 9 days that I had not admitted to myself before. I had been doing that math for years, not on napkins, not deliberately, but in the back of my head, in the place where you keep the things you do not want to look at. I had been running those numbers since Ilara was 2 or 3 years old. The timeline had never quite added up. I had noticed it the way you notice a hairline crack in a foundation wall. You see it. You tell yourself it is settling. You do not call an engineer, because calling an engineer means finding out. I had chosen not to finish the calculation for a decade. The test was not going to tell me something new. It was going to confirm something I had been refusing to know. On the 9th day, a Thursday afternoon, my phone chimed in the truck cab after a site walk. An email from the lab, results ready. I sat in the truck with the engine off and the July heat pressing through the windshield, and I did not open it. I drove home. I sat at the kitchen table. I opened the laptop. I logged into the portal. The page loaded. 0%. The number was at the top of the page, not buried in a paragraph, not softened by clinical language. Probability of paternity, 0%. 2 characters on a white screen. A number and a symbol. 11 years rewritten in the time it takes to read them. I did not cry. Stand up. I sat at my kitchen table with drywall dust still on my shirt, and I read that number again and again, the way a man reads a street sign in a language he does not speak, waiting for it to become something else. It did not become something else. I closed the laptop. The penguin cup was still in the cabinet. Ilara's weekend bag was still in the guest room closet. Her drawings were still on the fridge. Nothing in the house had changed. Everything in the house had changed. She was not my daughter. She had never been my daughter. And I had spent 11 years paying for someone else's child, while that child wore shoes that did not fit and locked herself in bathrooms at night. Let me ask you something. What does a man do with a fact that changes nothing and everything at the same time? Because that is where I was sitting at a kitchen table, with a number on a screen that said 0, and a child asleep 26 minutes away who still called me daddy, and would call me daddy again on Friday, and had no idea that the word meant something different now than it did a week ago. I called Colleen the next morning. I said 3 words. It came back 0. She was quiet for about 4 seconds. Then she said, "The DNA result does not end your obligations. It begins your options. There is a difference." She explained it to me the way she explains everything clearly, without sympathy, the way a surgeon explains a procedure. The affidavit I signed in that hospital was still valid. The rescission window had closed years ago, as far as Arizona law was concerned. I was still Ilara's legal father. The DNA result did not change that. What it changed was the landscape, because Lorraine had signed that document knowing the truth. And a document signed under fraud carries a different weight in a courtroom than a document signed in good faith. Do you know what an affidavit of parentage actually is? It is a piece of paper that says, "I am this child's father." I signed it because a woman I trusted handed it to me, and I did not ask questions. And that piece of paper was now the only thing standing between my daughter and a world where I had no legal right to see her. If I challenged it, I could lose everything. If I kept it, I had standing. Colleen told me to keep it. She told me to use it. She said the court does not care about DNA. The court cares about what is best for the child. And what was best for the child was not going to be decided by a lab result. It was going to be decided by evidence of how that child had been living. She told me to document everything. The attendance record, the shoes, the words about the door. She told me to move fast, because once Lorraine realized what was happening, she would prepare. And a prepared Lorraine was harder to beat than a surprised one. Then she said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I want to keep daughter." That weekend, Ilara fell asleep on the couch at 10:30. She had arranged the pillows in a row before she lay down by size, left to right, the way I arrange tools on a workbench. She did that. She organized things. She got it from watching me. Not from my blood, from my hands. And I sat in the chair across from her and watched her breathe under a blanket that has been at my house since she was 2, faded and washed 100 times and smelling like fabric softener, and something underneath that was just her. And decided. She organized the pillows the way I organize tools. She closed doors quietly the way I close doors quietly. She lined up her toothbrush and her hairbrush and her small stuffed animal on the edge of the bed the way I line up wrenches on a shelf. She learned all of that from watching me. Not from chromosomes, not from whatever biology connects her to a man whose name I still did not know. From sitting in my truck on weekends and watching my hands and copying what they did. And I will tell you right now, that is worth more than blood. That is worth more than any test. I said it out loud in that chair at 11 o'clock at night to nobody. She is mine, not because of blood, because I said so, and nothing that comes after this changes it. The house was quiet. She breathed. The air conditioner cycled on and off. I sat there until midnight. Then I got up and tucked the blanket around her feet where it had slipped, and I went to the kitchen table, and I opened a notebook. I wrote down everything. The attendance records and the numbers. The shoes and the size. The line about nobody coming in at night. The name on the emergency contact form that I did not recognize. And at the bottom of the page, I wrote the number 0%, and I drew a line under it, and I closed the notebook. I was going to war. Not for money, not for vindication, for a child who lined up pillows in a row because she learned it from a man she thought was her father. I was going to make sure she was right. And the first thing I needed to do was something Colleen had not suggested, and no lawyer would ever recommend. The thing no lawyer would recommend was not complicated. It was a phone call. But the order in which I made it before I retained Colleen for the custody case, before I filed a single motion, is the reason I am telling this story from my own house and not from a supervised visitation room. First, though, I had to sit in Colleen's office one more time. I walked in on a Monday morning in early August with a folder that contained the end of one life and the beginning of another. I set it on her desk. She opened it. The DNA result was on top. She read it without expression. The way she reads everything, like a woman who has already decided how she feels and is now deciding what to do. I said, "I am not giving her up," she said. "I did not think you were." She picked up the result and held it between 2 fingers like a piece of evidence, which is what it was. "This is not your exit. This is your leverage." She explained it. Lorraine signed the affidavit knowing the child was not mine. That is fraud. And fraud on a legal document does not expire. It waits. The document itself was still valid. I was still Ilara's legal father, still on the birth certificate, still entitled to every right that came with it. But the fraud underneath it changed the architecture. It meant Lorraine could not challenge my standing without exposing her own lie. It meant a judge would look at that signature and see a woman who committed fraud against the man who had been paying for her child for over a decade. Let me explain what an affidavit of parentage means when the person who signed it lied. It means every dollar I paid, every weekend I drove, every year I spent believing, was built on a document that should never have existed. And the person who created it knew that from the day she handed me the pen in that hospital room. and watched me write my name. Colleen tapped her pen once on the desk. She said, "A judge will look at this and say you paid for 11 years and now you want to stop." That is not what we are arguing. We are arguing that the money was stolen and the child was harmed. Those are two different cases and we need to win both, I said. Then let us file, she said. Not yet. That stopped me. I had the DNA result, I had the attendance record, I had photographs of shoes that did not fit. I had my daughter's own words about a door that should stay closed. I had everything I thought a court would need, and my lawyer was telling me it was not enough. She said, "We need a trigger event, something the court can point to. The shoes are good, the absences are good, but we need something that happened, not something you noticed. A judge needs an incident, a moment, something with a date and a time and a report number." How do you explain to a court that a child is in danger when the danger is not a single event but 1,000 small ones? Shoes that do not fit, meals that do not happen, a door that should stay closed and does not, a school record full of absences that nobody flagged because the only parent listed as primary contact was the one causing the absences. None of those things is an incident. All of those things together are a childhood falling apart in slow motion. And the law is not built for slow motion. The law is built for emergencies. And I did not have an emergency. Not yet, Colleen said. Document everything. Keep exercising your parental rights. Request medical records, stay visible at the school, and wait. I drove home with a legal strategy I could not use and a folder full of evidence that was not enough. She had told me to wait for a trigger event. I understood what that meant in legal terms. It meant something had to happen to Alara that was bad enough for a court to act. And I understood what that meant in real terms. It meant my daughter had to be in danger visible, documentable, undeniable danger before the system would protect her. I sat in my truck in Colleen's parking lot for a long time. The August heat pressed through the windshield. The folder sat on the passenger seat, and I thought about what Colleen had said, and I thought about what she had not said, and I made a decision. I was not going to wait for a trigger event. I was not going to wait for something bad to happen to my daughter so that a judge would believe it was bad enough. I picked up my phone and I called CPS. The CPS call lasted 11 minutes. A woman with a tired voice took down the details: my name, Lorraine's name, Alara's school, the address in Tempe. She said someone would follow up. She did not say when. I hung up and understood that I had set something in motion that I could not take back. Alara fell asleep on the couch at 9 o'clock that Saturday night, and I sat in the chair across from her and counted the things that were wrong with my daughter. She had arrived wearing a long-sleeve shirt in August, 112 degrees outside. When I asked about it, she pulled the cuffs down over her wrists and said she was cold. Nobody is cold in Phoenix in August. I did not push it. I wrote it down. She had eaten dinner like someone who had not seen food in a while, fast. Quiet, protective of her plate. She asked for seconds and then thirds, and I said yes both times without comment. After dinner, she pulled a blanket over her legs on the couch and was asleep before the sun went down. I photographed everything. The long sleeves, the cracked canvas of the shoes she had worn over, still 2 sizes too small. I pressed my thumb against the side of one, and the canvas split along a seam that had been holding on by thread. I photographed that too, date stamped. The next weekend was worse. She arrived with the same exhaustion, the same hunger, but this time she said something I have not been able to stop hearing since. We were at the kitchen table and I asked if she needed anything for school. Supplies, clothes, whatever she wanted. She looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face. Not sad, not angry, something flatter than both. She said, "I stopped asking for things when I was 9, I said. "Why?" she said. "Because asking starts the yelling, and then the yelling starts the other thing." She did not say what the other thing was. Her voice went level when she said it. The way a person's voice goes when they are describing something they have told themselves so many times it has lost its edges. I did not ask her to explain. Every part of me wanted to grab her shoulders and say, "What other thing who is doing this?" But Colleen had told me to document, not interrogate. So I changed the subject, and after she went to sleep, I sat at the kitchen table with a pen, pressing so hard into the notebook, it tore through the page. And I wrote down every word, verbatim. 9 years old. My daughter learned at 9 that wanting something out loud was dangerous. And I was across the city writing checks and believing that money was enough. That if I sent the dollars would become shoes and food and safety. I had been paying for a childhood that was not happening. 2 days later, I was in Colleen's office. She had obtained Lorraine's bank records through a discovery motion tied to the support order filed quietly weeks earlier. The statements were spread across her desk in rows. 3 years of transactions, and she had circled entries on almost every page in red ink. She said, "Look at the pattern." I looked. Every month, within 72 hours of my deposit landing, there was a withdrawal or a transfer to the same account number. Not small amounts, 1,700 here, 2,000 there, sometimes 3,000 in a single move. The money meant to feed and clothe my daughter was leaving Lorraine's account almost as fast as it arrived. I said. "Where is it going?" Colleen said. "This account number. It appears 41 times over 3 years. We do not know who owns it yet." The support I had been sending was not being wasted. It was being moved, deliberately, repeatedly, to someone who was not my daughter. The neglect was not poverty. Lorraine was not struggling. She was diverting. Colleen circled the account number one more time and set down her pen. She said, "If we identify who owns this account, we have the whole picture." I stared at those digits. I did not recognize the number, but something turned over in the back of my mind. The name listed as a secondary emergency contact on Alara's school form, a man described as a family friend. A man whose name Lorraine had never mentioned once in 11 years. Two things that should not be connected were starting to point in the same direction. I did not say the name out loud in Colleen's office. I did not need to. The account number on the bank statement and the name on the emergency contact form were two threads I could not yet tie together with proof, but they were pulling in the same direction. I told Colleen what I was thinking. She said, "Do not guess. Let me trace it. Guessing out loud is how cases fall apart." I want to stop here for a moment, because what happens next is the part that changed everything. And I need you to understand exactly where I was standing when the ground moved. If you found out your daughter was not yours by blood, if you had the proof in your hand, and the law told you to wait, would you fight for her? Or would you walk away? Before I tell you what that phone call was about, drop your answer in the comments. Fight or walk away. And tell me why in 5 words. A quick note, the next part includes some fictionalized details added to deepen the emotional impact. What matters is the lesson behind it. Back in Colleen's office, she laid it out the way she always did. Plainly, without softening. She said, "If we file today, we lose." I asked her how that was possible. I had attendance records, photographs, bank statements showing money leaving faster than it arrived, and a DNA result that proved fraud on a legal document, she said. "A judge will see a child who attends school more days than she misses, a child with a roof and a bed and a mother who has not been arrested. You have a pattern. You do not have an incident. The law is not built for urgency. It is built for process. And process does not care that a child is wearing shoes from 3 years ago, while her mother moves thousands of dollars a month to an account that does not belong to that child. Process requires patience, and patience requires faith that the child will still be okay by the time the system catches up." I said. "How long?" Colleen said. 6 months, maybe 8. We build the financial case. We document the pattern. We get the account holder identified, and we file when the record is undeniable. I said. She does not have 6 months. She said. That is what every parent says. I said. I am not every parent. I am a man who is not even her father, and I am the only person in her life who is paying attention. Colleen was quiet for a moment. She set down her pen and folded her hands over the bank statements. She said, I hope the trigger event does not come. Because if it comes, it means something happened to that child that we could not prevent. I understood what she was saying. She was saying that the fastest way to save my daughter was for something terrible to happen to her first. And the slowest way was to do everything right and hope the court moved before Lorraine's house got worse. There was no middle path. There was only fast and terrible or slow and correct. And neither one of those options was built for a man sitting in a leather chair gripping the armrests and thinking about a girl who stopped asking for things at 9 years old. What do you do when the person telling you to wait is the only person who can help you move? And she is right. And you know she is right. And the child you are trying to protect does not have the time that being right requires. You sit there. You agree to the 6-month plan. You tell yourself that patience is strategy and that strategy wins cases. You believe it for about 45 seconds. Colleen was reaching for the file to outline next steps when my phone buzzed on her desk. The screen lit up with a number I did not recognize. Not Lorraine, not Wade, not the school. A number with no name attached to it. Not Lorraine, not Wade, not the school. A number with no name attached to it. Just 10 digits glowing against the dark wood. Colleen looked at the phone. She looked at me. She said, "Answer it." I picked it up. The voice on the other end was calm and professional and belonged to a woman I had never spoken to in my life. She said, "Mr. Holbrook, this is the Arizona Department of Child Safety. We need to speak with you about your daughter." I looked at Colleen across the desk. She was already reaching for a pen. The DCS call was not about what I expected. The caseworker asked routine questions, my relationship to Alara, my custody schedule, whether I had concerns. I answered everything. She said they had received a report and would be conducting a visit. She did not say when. 3 days later, on a Wednesday night at 9:47, my daughter called me from a number I did not recognize. Her voice was small. Not scared exactly, controlled. The kind of controlled that a child learns when being loud has consequences. She said, "Daddy, there is a man here." I was standing in my kitchen. I set down the glass I was holding and I said, "What man?" She said, "He was supposed to leave, but he did not leave." I said, "Where is your mother?" She said, "She went out." I said, She said, Tuesday. It was Wednesday night. Lorraine had been gone since Tuesday, and my daughter was in that house with a man who was supposed to leave and did not. I pressed my hand flat on the counter to keep it from shaking. I said, "Are you safe right now?" She said, "I am in the bathroom. I used Mrs. Alderman's phone. She is next door." I said, "Stay in the bathroom. Lock the door." She said, "I already did." That stopped me. She had already locked it before she called, before I told her to. She had gone to the bathroom and locked the door because she knew that was what you do when there is a man in the house and your mother is gone. An 11-year-old who locks a bathroom door before calling her father is an 11-year-old who has locked that door before. She had a protocol. She had practiced this. She said, 4 nights this month, Daddy. I counted them. 4 nights. She counted them. My daughter kept count of the nights she was left alone because nobody else was counting. She tracked her own abandonment the way I track materials on a job site, carefully, precisely. Because if you do not write it down, nobody believes it happened. I was already moving. I grabbed my keys off the counter, and I was through the garage door and in my truck with the engine running before she finished her next sentence. I pulled my work phone from the console and dialed 911 with one hand while holding her on the line with the other. I told the dispatcher there was an unattended minor with an unknown male in the residence. I gave Lorraine's address. The dispatcher said a unit would be sent. I said I was on my way. The distance from my house in Chandler to Lorraine's place in Tempe is 32 minutes at the speed limit. I will not tell you how fast I drove. I will tell you that I made it in 19. I kept Alara on the phone the whole way. She was calm in the way that breaks you, not because she was brave, but because she was used to this. She told me the man had been coming to the house on and off for months. She did not know name. He watched television, and sometimes he yelled at the screen, and sometimes he yelled at nothing. She said he had never touched her. I believed her. I also understood that never is a word that means not yet when a child is alone in a house with a stranger and the only adult who is supposed to be there left on a bed Tuesday and did not come back. There is a version of fatherhood that is paperwork and payments and scheduled weekends. And there is a version that is driving down the I-10 at 10 o'clock at night with both phones in your hands because your daughter locked herself in a bathroom and called you from a neighbor's phone. I had been the first kind for 11 years. I became the second kind in the time it took to turn a key in the ignition. The highway was mostly empty. The truck shook at the speed I was pushing. Hot rubber and night air came through the cracked window, and the headlights cut two white lines into the dark ahead of me, and Alara breathed on the other end of the phone. Quiet now, not talking, just breathing so I would know she was still there. She was quiet for the last 10 minutes. Then she said something that I have not been able to unhear since. She said, "Daddy, do not be mad at me for calling." I gripped the wheel until my knuckles went white. My daughter was apologizing for asking for help. That is what that house had taught her. That needing someone was something you said sorry for. I told her she never had to apologize for calling me. I said it once, and I meant it for the rest of her life. Then I said, "I am coming, stay where you are." She said okay and went quiet, and I drove the last 6 minutes listening to her breathe. I parked at the end of Lorraine's street with the headlights off and the engine running. A patrol car was already at the curb, 2 houses down. Lights dark, an officer sitting inside writing something on a clipboard. I texted Alara. 30 seconds later, the front door opened, and my daughter walked out, carrying everything she owned in a school backpack. She came down the sidewalk the way a person moves through a room where someone is sleeping, careful, practiced, weight on the balls of her feet. The backpack was over one shoulder, no jacket. A t-shirt she had outgrown, the hem riding above her waistband. She was 11 years old, and she had packed her life into a single bag and walked out of her mother's house without looking back. Not because she was brave, because she was ready. She had been ready for this the way some children are ready for fire drills, not because they expect the fire, but because they have learned that the alarm can go off at any time. And the only thing you control is how fast you move. She got in the truck and pulled the door shut with both hands, making sure it clicked but did not slam. That is not how a child closes a door. That is how someone who has learned that noise means trouble closes a door. She set the backpack between her feet. She said, "Can we go?" That was all she said. "Can we go?" I looked at her arms in the dashboard light. Goosebumps from her elbows to her wrists. I turned the heat on in August because my daughter was cold, and I did not trust myself to speak yet. I pulled away from the curb and drove past the patrol car without stopping. The officer did not look up. 3 miles away, I pulled into a Circle K and parked under the fluorescent lights. The petroleum smell came through the cracked window, and the lights turned everything flat and white, and I could see Alara's face clearly for the first time that night. She looked tired, the way adults look tired, not sleepy. Used up. I bought her a water from inside, and when I came back, she started talking. Not because I asked, because the fluorescent lights and the gas station and the distance from that house gave her enough room to say what she had been holding. She said, "He comes when Mom goes out. Sometimes she comes back the same night, sometimes she does not." I asked how long this had been happening. She said, "I do not know. A while." She said a while the way you say always. She told me the man watched television loud and sometimes yelled at the screen and sometimes yelled at nothing. She said he had never come to her room. She said she heard sounds from the front door she would not describe. She said she counted the nights 4 this month alone because counting made it feel like something she was in charge of instead of something that was happening to her. Let me tell you what it sounds like when an 11-year-old girl asks you not to be angry at the person who left her alone with a stranger. It sounds like forgiveness, and it should not. Because a child who forgives that has been taught that her safety matters less than her mother's feelings. She said, "Please do not be mad at Mom." She said it looking at her hands. I said, "Elara, I need you to answer me honestly. Has anyone hurt you?" She looked at me and said, "No." She said it fast and she said it easy, and I believed her. I still believe her. But I will never stop being afraid that I believed her because I needed to. I drove her home. She fell asleep before we reached the interstate, her head against the window, the backpack still between her feet like she might need to grab it again. I carried her inside and set her on the couch under the blanket she has used since she was 2. Then I went to the kitchen and opened my notebook and wrote down every word she had said. Every detail. Every pause. At the bottom of the page I wrote the question I would ask Colleen in the morning. Is this enough? Is my daughter finally in enough danger for the law to care? I did not wait until morning. The answer to the question I had written in my notebook was sitting in the passenger seat with her head against the window, asleep in a t-shirt she had outgrown. And I was not going to let another hour pass without making it official. I called the Maricopa County CPS hotline from the Circle K parking lot at 11:30 at night. The hold music played for 2 minutes. Then a woman answered and asked me to state the nature of my concern. I said, "My 11-year-old daughter has been left alone overnight at least 4 times this month. There is an unidentified man in the residence. Her mother has been absent since Tuesday." The operator asked if the child was safe. I said, "She is with me." She asked for the address. I gave it. She asked for names and dates, and I gave those too. Reading from my notebook under the fluorescent lights with the gas station smell coming through the window and my daughter's breathing filling the truck. The call lasted 11 minutes. 11 minutes to report what had been happening for months, maybe longer. Every second of those 11 minutes mattered more than every check I had ever written, because the timestamp on that call is what told a judge who I was. I did not call Colleen until 7 the next morning. I want you to understand why. A man who calls his lawyer at midnight is a man with a strategy. A man who calls CPS at midnight is a man with a daughter. The distinction sounds small. In family court, it is everything. I needed the record to show a father who acted on instinct, not instruction. A parent, not a plaintiff. Colleen answered on the second ring. She did not sound like someone who had just woken up. She sounded like someone who had been waiting. I told her what happened. The call from Elara, the man in the house, the 4 nights alone, the drive, the pickup, the CPS report filed at 11:30. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You called CPS before you called me," I said. "Yes," she said. "Good, that is exactly right. Do not move. I am filing the emergency motion in 2 hours." The ex parte petition went to Maricopa County Superior Court by 9:40 that morning. I sat in a hallway that smelled like floor wax and recycled air, and waited while Colleen presented the filing to a judge I could not see. She came out 40 minutes later and told me we had a hearing at 1 o'clock. I asked if that was fast. She said it was the fastest she had seen in 24 years. A courtroom is a place where sequence matters more than substance. Not what you did, but when you did it, and what it tells the court about why. CPS at 11:30 p.m. says panic. Lawyer at 7 a.m. says follow through. That order told the judge a story no attorney could have scripted because it was not scripted. It was a father in a gas station parking lot doing the only thing that made sense. The hearing was brief. The judge was a man in his 60s with reading glasses he looked over more than through. He asked one question that decided everything. He said, "When was the report to Child Protective Services made and by whom?" Colleen said. 11:30 last night. Your Honor, by my client. Before he contacted me this morning. The judge looked at me over those glasses. He wrote something down. I do not know what he wrote, but I know what it meant. It meant he believed me. Temporary emergency custody was granted that afternoon. 1 page. My name, Ilara's name, a case number, a judge's signature. The most important piece of paper I have ever held. And it weighed nothing, Colleen said afterward. That sequence is why we won the motion. CPS before lawyer, state before strategy. Most fathers do it the other way around. Most fathers lose. I drove home with the custody order on the passenger seat where Ilara had been sleeping 12 hours earlier. She was at my house now, safe, under her blanket, wearing shoes I had bought that morning from a store that opened at 8. I had won the first battle. But Lorraine had not been served yet. When I pulled into the driveway and checked my phone, there were 14 missed calls from her number. And one from a number I now recognized. It was the same number from the emergency contact form at Ilara's school. The man in the house knew my name now. I did not return the call from the emergency contact number. Colleen told me not to. She said, "Do not engage with anyone connected to Lorraine until we know who we are dealing with. Let the system work." So I let it work. And the hardest part of fighting for your daughter is the part where you stop fighting and let someone else decide whether she is worth saving. The DCS investigator assigned to the case was a woman named Ramona Stanton. 17 years in Maricopa County. The kind of calm that comes from having seen everything and being surprised by nothing. I did not meet her during the investigation. I did not speak with her. I did not know what she was doing, or where she was going, or what she was finding. Because the system does not tell you what it is finding, it tells you when it is done. 3 weeks. That is how long it took. 3 weeks of silence while a stranger decided whether my daughter's life was bad enough to matter on paper. I went to work. I ran my cruise. I came home. I helped Ilara with homework at the kitchen table and made sure she ate dinner and checked that she was sleeping through the night without waking up startled. She was adjusting. She was not fine. She organized her things in rows, and she flinched at loud sounds, and she still closed doors with both hands. But she was adjusting. 3 weeks is how long it takes to pour a foundation on a commercial site. I know because I have poured hundreds. But 3 weeks waiting for a caseworker to decide whether your daughter was neglected is not construction. It is demolition in slow motion. And you are not allowed watch. Wade asked me one afternoon at the shop how I was holding up. I said, "I am not holding up. I am standing still. That is different. A long up means you are carrying something. Standing still means you are waiting for someone to tell you whether you are allowed to carry it." He did not say anything after that. He just handed me a coffee and went back to the floor. I learned later, from the report Ramona eventually read into the record, what she had done during those 3 weeks. She made an unannounced visit to Lorraine's house in Tempe. She interviewed Ilara privately at school without telling me or Lorraine in advance. She pulled criminal background checks on every adult associated with the residence. She reviewed the attendance records I had flagged and the bank records Colleen had subpoenaed. She built her own case from scratch, independent of mine. Because that is what the system requires. A finding that does not depend on the accuser's version of events. Have you ever waited for a phone call that could go 2 ways, and both ways change your life? And the only thing you can do is go to work and pretend the phone in your pocket is not the most important object in the world. That was September. Every time my phone buzzed, I checked the screen, like a man checking a lottery ticket. Except I was not hoping to win. I was hoping not to lose. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon in mid-September. I was in my truck at a job site in Glendale, still smelling like sawdust and sweat, when the screen lit up with a number I did not recognize. But this time the area code was DCS. Ramona Stanton's voice was professional, measured. But there was a weight in it that I could hear underneath the training, not alarm, not sympathy. Something between the two that sits in the throat when a person has found something they wish they had not found. She said, "Mr. Holbrook, I have completed my assessment. I need to discuss my findings with you in person," I said. "Can you tell me anything now?" she said. "I would prefer to do this face to face." I sat there with the phone pressed to my ear, and the September sun baking through the windshield. And I understood that whatever she had found was not simple. Simple gets discussed on the phone. Simple gets summarized in a letter. Face-to-face means the report has weight. It means the findings are going to land on someone, and she wants to see your face when they do, I said. "Tomorrow morning. I will be there," she said. "Bring your attorney." I hung up and sat in the truck in the parking lot. Bring your attorney. A caseworker does not say that when the news is clean. She says it when what she found has edges, when it is going to cut someone, and she is not yet sure who. Colleen and I were scheduled to meet Ramona at the DCS office Wednesday morning. That gave me 2 days to prepare for whatever those edges were going to look like. But the thing that undid me did not happen at the DCS office. It happened in my own kitchen on a Sunday night, because Wade came over after Alara was supposed to be asleep, and we made the mistake of thinking that a closed door means a child is not listening. Wade brought coffee from the gas station and sat at the kitchen table the way he always sits, shoulders forward, hands around the cup, like a man waiting for instructions. But he was not there for instructions. He was there because he had watched me hold myself together for 2 months, and he could see the cracks. We kept our voices low. I told him about the CPS timeline, the bank account trail, the meeting with Ramona. I told him I did not know what she had found, and that the waiting was harder than the fighting. He listened to all of it, and then he said the thing I had not let myself say. He said, "You cannot carry this alone forever," I said. "I am not carrying it alone. I have Colleen and Ramona and a judge," he said. "That is not what I mean. I mean the part where you look at her every morning and know something she does not know about herself. That part. You cannot carry that alone." He was right. The custody fight was the easy part. The court dates, the filings, the strategy, those had steps and timelines and an attorney telling me what came next. But the DNA result lived in a different part of me. It sat behind every conversation I had with Alara, behind every homework question and every good night. Like a wall she could not see, but I could feel every time I was in the room with her. I said, "How do you tell an 11-year-old that the man she calls daddy is not her father?" Wade set down his coffee. He said, "You do not. You tell her that the man she calls daddy chose to be her father, and that is harder and it counts for more. Let me tell you something about secrets kept from children. Children do not need to hear the words. They hear the pauses. They hear the way a conversation stops when they walk into a room. They hear the shape of the thing you are not saying, and they build their own version of it. And their version is almost always worse than the truth." I was about to answer Wade when I saw movement in the hallway. Not a sound movement, a shadow shifting in the light that spilled from the bathroom down the hall. I stopped talking. Wade saw my face and turned. Alara was standing in the kitchen doorway in bare feet. She had organized her new shoes by the front door in a neat row and walked down the hallway without them. Quiet as a child who has practiced being quiet. The hallway light was behind her, and I could not see her expression clearly, but I could see her posture still, watchful. The way she stood when she was deciding whether it was safe to speak. She had not heard everything. But she had heard enough. The word father, the word truth. The silence that sat between them like something neither of us wanted to touch. She looked at me. Not at Wade. At me. And she said, "What are you keeping from me, Daddy?" She did not say it angry. She said it tired. Like she had been waiting to ask and had finally run out of reasons not to. The refrigerator hummed in the silence that followed. Wade's hands were still around his coffee cup. Night air came through the cracked window above the sink, and I could feel it on my neck, and I could feel my daughter's eyes on my face, and I could not find a single word. She was standing there in a t-shirt that fit now because I had bought it. In a house where nobody came in at night. Asking the one question I had no answer for. I had fought Lorraine. I had fought the court. I had fought timelines and bank records and a man whose name I still had not said out loud. But I could not fight an 11-year-old girl in bare feet asking me to tell her the truth. Wade looked at me. I looked at her. The kitchen was small, and the question was enormous, and there was nowhere in the room to put it down. I said, "Alara, sit down." And for the first time in this whole thing, I did not know what was going to come out of my mouth next. I told Alara that I was fighting to keep her safe, that her mother had made mistakes, that none of it was her fault. She listened, and then she said, "I know it is not my fault, Daddy. I just want to stay here." That sentence carried me through every hearing that followed. But what I heard 2 days later in Colleen's office made those hearings necessary in ways I had not yet imagined. Ramona Stanton opened a manila folder on the desk and began reading in the flattest voice I have ever heard. 31 pages. She did not summarize. She read. Colleen sat beside me with a legal pad and a pen that did not stop moving. The formal findings were substantiated for improper supervision and injurious environment. Ramona said those words the way you read a serial number. No inflection, no emphasis, no opinion. The home visit had found insufficient food in the kitchen. Utilities that had been shut off and turned back on 3 times in 6 months. And physical evidence of extended adult absences, dishes left for days, mail piled inside the front door. Alara's private interview at school corroborated the overnight absences. She had told Ramona the same things she told me, in the same flat voice, with the same careful counting. Substantiated. That is the word the state uses when it has looked at your child's life and concluded, officially, on paper, with a case number, that she was harmed. Not neglected, not at risk, harmed. And the harm was not an accident. It was a pattern that someone chose not to stop. I sat with my hands flat on my thighs to keep them still. The report smelled like toner and paper and the stale air of a building where people read terrible things in quiet rooms every day. Colleen's pen stopped. She looked up from her notes and said, "And the background check on the adult male in the residence." Ramona turned to page 19. She said, "That is the part you need to hear." The man's name was Kendrick Ballard. He was 41. He had an open criminal matter in Pinal County, and he was Alara's biological father. I did not move. I did not speak. Ramona kept reading because that is what investigators do. They read findings, they do not wait for reactions. She said Kendrick Ballard had known since Alara's birth that she was his daughter. He had never established paternity. He had never paid $1 of support. He had never appeared on a single school form or medical record until the emergency contact entry I had found months earlier. I want you to understand what happened. A man who knew he was the father never claimed the child, never contributed to her care, and then told the mother to demand more money from the man who did so he could take a piece of it. He treated my daughter like a revenue stream. He monetized a child he refused to raise. Colleen said, "The bank transfers." Ramona nodded. She said, "In 2022, Mr. Ballard advised Ms. Prescott to file for increased child support. The motion was granted. Beginning that year, Additional funds were transferred from Ms. Prescott's account to an account in Mr. Ballard's name within 72 hours of each deposit. She paused. Over the period we examined, approximately $180,000 was diverted to that account. $180,000 of money I sent for my daughter, routed through Lorraine's account to a man who watched television in my daughter's living room and left when he felt like leaving and came back when he felt like coming back, and never once bought her a pair of shoes that fit. Ramona closed the folder. Colleen closed her notebook. The room was quiet, the way rooms are quiet after someone has said something that changes the shape of everything that came before it. Colleen looked at Ramona and said, "This changes the filing. This is not a custody dispute anymore. This is fraud, child endangerment, and financial exploitation." She looked at me. She said, "We are not just going to win custody. We are going to recover every dollar." I nodded. I did not trust my voice. The rage I felt was not hot. It was cold and clear, and it had a direction now. It had a name. Kendrick Ballard. The man on the emergency contact form. The man behind the bank account. The man who had handed Lorraine the match and watched her set fire to my daughter's childhood for profit. Then Colleen said the part I was not expecting. She said, "Lorraine's attorney called this morning. She wants to negotiate." I told Colleen I was not interested in negotiating. She said, "Good. Neither am I. We go to court." We went to court, and what happened there took 12 minutes to argue and 45 seconds to end. Lorraine's attorney stood up 11 feet from where I was sitting and said the words out loud. He said, "Mr. Holbrook is not this child's biological father and has no standing to seek custody." He said it in a courtroom, with wood paneling and overhead vents pushing recycled air and a judge behind a bench and me in a chair with my hands flat on the table, because if I moved them, I was not sure what they would do. His name was David Trask, and he argued the way attorneys argue when the facts are against them. He argued procedure. He said the affidavit of parentage was signed under a mutual mistake of fact. He said both parties believed I was the biological father at the time of signing. He said that when a legal document is premised on a mutual error, the document is voidable. He asked the court to dismiss my custody petition entirely. He said it like it was simple, like 11 years was a clerical error. Like every weekend, and every check, and every pair of shoes, and every night I lay awake wondering if my daughter was safe, could be voided by a motion filed on behalf of the woman who caused all of it. Let me tell you what it feels like to sit in a courtroom while a stranger argues that you are not a father. It feels like someone is reading your life out loud and editing out the parts that mattered. The attorney does not mention the school portal, or the attendance records, or the shoes that did not fit. He does not mention the nights alone, or the man in the house, or the call from a gas station parking lot. He mentions the DNA. He mentions the affidavit. He builds a world where biology is the only thing that counts, and then he asks a judge to live in it. Lorraine sat behind her attorney with her hands folded in her lap. She did not look at me. Not once. She looked at the table in front of her the way a person looks at a table when they know what is coming and have decided not to watch. Trask spoke for 12 minutes. When he sat down, Colleen stood up with a 4-page brief she had already filed with the court that morning. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She said, "Your Honor, mutual mistake requires both parties to be mistaken. My client was mistaken. Ms. Prescott was not." She let that land, then she continued. Ms. Prescott knew from the day of birth that Kendrick Ballard was the biological father. She signed the affidavit knowing it was false. That is not mutual mistake. That is fraud. She made 2 more points. The 60-day rescission window for the affidavit closed the year she was born, and the DCS report substantiated findings of improper supervision and injurious environment established that the child's welfare required my continued legal parentage. She presented the brief. She sat down. The whole thing took less than 4 minutes. 12 minutes to argue. 45 seconds to deny. That is how long it takes for a lie to collapse when it meets a document the liar signed herself. The judge looked at Trask over his reading glasses. He said, "The rescission window closed the year the child was born. The affidavit stands. The motion is denied." He wrote something on the file and set it aside the way a person sets aside something that was never going to take long. I did not move. I did not celebrate. There is no celebration in a courtroom where the subject is whether you are allowed to be your daughter's father. There is only the absence of the worst outcome. And that absence feels like breathing after holding your breath underwater. Not joy. Just air. Colleen touched my arm once. That was all. Trask gathered his papers. Lorraine stood up. And then she did something I did not expect. She looked at me. For the first time since the hearing began, she turned her head and looked directly at my face. I had prepared myself for anger. I had prepared myself for the kind of hatred that comes when a person's strategy fails in public. But that is not what I saw. She looked relieved, like a person who has been carrying something heavy for 11 years and has finally been told she can set it down. There was no fight left in her face. There was no strategy. There was just the exhaustion of a woman who had been lying for so long that losing felt like permission to stop. And I understood that what came next was not going to be a fight. It was going to be a confession. The confession did not happen outside the courtroom. It happened inside it. Under oath. In front of a judge. Because Colleen made sure there was nowhere left for it to go but the record. She stood up and buttoned her jacket, and I knew from the way she moved that what was about to happen would take less than 5 minutes and last the rest of Lorraine's life. Lorraine was already on the stand. Trask had put her there to testify about the custody arrangement. And now it was Colleen's turn. She walked to the podium with no notes. She did not need notes. She needed 4 questions. The first one. Ms. Prescott, did you file a motion to increase child support in 2022? Lorraine said. Yes. The second, did anyone advise you to file that motion? Trask stood up. Objection, Your Honor. Relevance, the judge said. Overruled. Answer the question, Lorraine said. Yes. The third. Who advised you to file that motion? 6 seconds. I counted them. Lorraine looked at Trask. He looked at the table. She looked at the judge. Then she looked at the wall behind me, past my shoulder, at something only she could see. And she said, Kendrick Ballard. The courtroom was silent. Not quiet silent. The kind of silence that happens when everyone in a room hears the same thing at the same time and nobody knows what to do with it. 4 questions. That is all it took. 4 questions and a 6-second pause and a name spoken to a wall. And 11 years of fraud collapsed in a courtroom that smelled like floor wax and old paper. Lorraine had said his name the way a person says a word they have been holding in their mouth for years. Carefully. Like releasing something that might bite on the way out. The 4th question. Was Mr. Ballard residing in the home with your daughter at the time you filed that motion? Lorraine said. Yes, Colleen said. No further questions. She sat down. She did not look at me. She did not need to. The room understood what had just happened. A woman on the stand had named the man who told her to file for more of my money so he could take a larger cut of it. She had named him under oath, in a custody hearing, in front of the judge who would decide where my daughter lived. And she had done it after 6 seconds of looking for somewhere else to put the answer and finding nowhere. Then Ramona Stanton took the stand. She testified for 50 minutes. She read the findings into the record the way she had read them in Colleen's office, flat, steady, without emphasis, because the facts did not need emphasis. Substantiated improper supervision. Injurious environment. Overnight absences documented by the child herself. An unrelated adult male with an open criminal matter in Pinal County, residing in the home. Bank transfers to an account in that man's name, month after month, within days of every deposit I made. 50 minutes of testimony is a long time to sit and listen to the official record of your daughter's suffering. But it is a short time compared to the years it took to build that record. And every page Ramona turned was a year I could not get back. Lorraine sat behind Trask and did not move. She looked at the table. She looked at her hands. She did not look at me. When Ramona finished, the judge asked Trask if he wished to cross-examine. He said, "No, Your Honor." That was the moment I knew it was over. When a lawyer declines to question the witness who just buried his client, there is nothing left to fight with. He is not surrendering. He is acknowledging that the ground he was standing on is gone. The judge looked at both tables. He said he would issue his ruling within 72 hours. Then he said something I was not expecting. He looked directly at Lorraine and said, "Ms. Prescott, I want to be clear. The findings entered into the record today may be referred to the county attorney's office for review." Trask put his hand on Lorraine's arm. She did not react. She did not flinch or cry or look away. She sat perfectly still, the way a person sits when they have already calculated the cost of what they said and decided to pay it. She had known. From the moment she said Kendrick's name, she had known she was not just losing custody. She was losing everything. And she had said it anyway. That is the part I still think about. Not the fraud, not the money, not the years. The 6 seconds, and the fact that when the 6 seconds ended, she chose to speak. The county attorney's office did open a file. Lorraine was not charged that week or the week after, but the referral was real and the investigation was moving. That part of the story belonged to other people now. My part came 48 hours after the hearing, on a Wednesday morning, when I drove to the courthouse and picked up the ruling and read it in my truck in the parking garage, because I not trust myself to read it in front of anyone. The order was 6 pages. I skipped to the second paragraph. Primary physical and legal custody to the petitioner. I read those words 3 times. Then I set the paper on the passenger seat and put my hands on the steering wheel and sat in the concrete silence of the parking garage with the ventilation humming overhead, and I did not move for a long time. 5 words, 4 months of fighting, 11 years of not fighting, and 5 words on a piece of paper that said my daughter was mine. Not because of blood, because a judge looked at everything and decided that the man who showed up was the father, and the woman who signed the document was not fit to have her. The order continued. Supervised visitation for Lorraine, 2 hours twice a month, monitored by a court-approved third party. 4 hours a month. That is what 11 years of what she did reduced to. 4 hours with someone watching. Then the support reversal. Lorraine ordered to pay $340 per month. I want you to understand what that number means in a case like this. It is not about the money. $340 does not begin to offset what was taken. It is about the principle. It is the court saying you are still a parent and parents pay. It is a judge putting a number on an obligation that Lorraine spent 11 years pretending did not exist. I sat in the truck and I called my mother. Leona answered on the first ring like she had been waiting by the phone, which she probably had. I said, "I got her." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Good. Now go be her father." That was all she said. That was enough. 2 days later, I was in Colleen's office for what I thought would be the last time. It was not the last time. Because the financial discovery that came back from the subpoenas painted a picture that was worse than what I had imagined and more organized than I had feared. Colleen laid out the bank records in chronological order across her desk. She pointed to the transfers I already knew about, the money moving to Kendrick's account within days of every deposit. But now there was more. A vehicle lease in Lorraine's name, $487 a month, registered to an address in Mesa I had never heard of, and a storage unit, $175 a month, rented the same month the school absences started climbing. $180,000 to Kendrick over 3 years. A leased car, a storage unit, My daughter's support bought a man a lifestyle, while his daughter locked herself in bathrooms and wore shoes that split at the seams. The scheme was not desperate. It was organized. It had line items and monthly transfers and a leased vehicle and a rented space to keep whatever needed keeping. It was a business, and the product was my daughter's childhood, I said. What was in the storage unit? Colleen said. We do not know yet, but we will. She closed the last folder and set it on the stack. Then she said, There is one more thing. She told me the county attorney's office had opened a formal file. Kendrick's open matter in Pinal County had been consolidated with a new investigation in Maricopa. The fraud, the financial diversion, the child endangerment, all of it was now under one case number in one office with one set of prosecutors who did not work for me and did not answer to me. She said, This is not just a family court case anymore. This is criminal. The storage unit turned out to hold nothing dramatic furniture from an apartment Kendrick had given up. Boxes he never unpacked. It was not the smoking gun I expected, but by then, it did not need to be. The bank records already were. I sat with that for a moment. I had started this to protect my daughter. I had called CPS from a gas station parking lot and filed motions and sat through hearings and read a 31-page report and listened to 50 minutes of testimony. And now the story I thought was ending was reaching the part where someone other than me decided what justice looked like. I did not know yet whether that was a relief or a loss. I still do not, but I had the custody order. I had my daughter, and for the first time in 4 months, those two things were enough. Let me tell you what happens after you win. Because winning is the part people think is the end, and it is not even close. The criminal investigation moved forward without me. Prosecutors do not update you. They build their case the way Ramona built hers. Quietly, on their own schedule, in rooms you are not invited into. My job was no longer to fight. My job was to be a father. And that turned out to be harder. Lorraine texted me in November, asking to meet outside of lawyers. Colleen advised against it. I went anyway. We sat at a coffee shop near Papago Park with 2 cups on the table between us and nothing else. No attorneys, no case numbers, no court reporter. Just 2 people who had made a child together in a different life and were now sitting in the wreckage of everything that came after. She did not apologize. I want you to know that. She sat across from me and explained 11 years, and she did not say the word sorry once. Not because she was not sorry, but because sorry is a word for small things, and what she did was not small enough for a word cover. She said, The first year I almost told you. The second year it was harder. By the 5th year, the truth would have cost me everything. By the 11th, it would have cost Ilara everything. I said, It cost Ilara everything anyway. She looked at her coffee and did not answer. The shop was loud with other people's conversations and the hiss of the espresso machine, and none of it touched us. We were in a pocket of silence that 11 years of lying had built. She said, What are you going to tell her? I said nothing. She said, You have to tell her something eventually. I said, I know. But I do not have to tell her today. And I do not have to tell you what I am going to say. That was the last time Lorraine and I spoke outside of a supervised visitation exchange. She did not ask to meet again. I did not offer. There was nothing left to say that would not make it worse. And sometimes the kindest thing 2 people can do is stop talking. Ilara started therapy the first week of November. A woman named Dr. Calloway in Tempe, recommended by the school counselor. I drove her twice a week and sat in the waiting room and read nothing and thought about everything. The therapist did not tell me what they talked about. She told me to be patient and to be present and to let Ilara set the pace. The pace was slow. The first few weeks, Ilara was excessively polite. Please and thank you and may I and is it okay if? She treated my house like a hotel she was grateful to be staying in. She made her bed every morning with the corners tucked. She washed her dishes before I could get to them. She was performing the role of a good guest because she had not yet decided she was a resident. A child who has been moved too many times does not unpack. She keeps her bag ready. She keeps her shoes by the bed. The day she leaves them in the hallway is the day she has decided to stay. And that day matters more than any custody order a judge can write. It happened in pieces. She left a hoodie on the kitchen chair on a Tuesday, a book on the counter on a Thursday. One bad Wednesday, she went to her room and closed the door and did not come out. I sat in the hallway outside it for an hour with my back against the wall. I did not knock. I did not ask if she was okay. I sat there because that is what a present father does. He does not fix the door. He sits outside it. After an hour, she opened it and said, "Can I have a sandwich?" I made her a sandwich. That was enough. Then one Saturday evening in early December, I came down the hallway and stopped. Her shoes were in the middle of the floor. New ones, the right size, the ones I had bought her. Left out like they belonged there, like she was not planning to grab them on the way out, like she lived here. I found the old ones that same week. They were in the back of the guest closet. Canvas sneakers split at the seams, sized for a child 3 years younger. I held them and thought about throwing them away. Then I put them back. I kept them because they are the proof of what happens when the person who is supposed to protect a child decides that money is easier than love. And I kept them because someday Alara will ask me to tell her the whole story. And when she does, I will need something to hold in my hands. She has not asked yet. The shoes are still in the closet. The story I will tell her someday is still in my chest where I carry it. And I do not know when it will come out, or what shape it will have when it does. But 6 months after the ruling, something happened that made me understand what I had been building all along, and it was not a case. A data center contract came in. 14 months, 4 days a week on site, $3.8 million in revenue. A year earlier, I would have signed it before the ink was dry. Instead, I sat in my truck at the job site and thought about Tuesdays, about Wednesdays, about 3:15 in the afternoon when the school bus stops at the end of my street. Wade was in the passenger seat. He said, "You are turning down $3.8 million. I said, "I am turning down 4 days a week away from my daughter." He said, "That is the same thing." I said, "No, it is not. It has never been the same thing. I just used to think it was." I made him a partner that afternoon, at a number that worked out to about 18%. Revenue dropped to $3.1 million. Neither of us said out loud what the partnership was actually for. It was for Tuesdays. It was for the phone that rings when I am helping with homework. It was for making sure someone could run the company while I was doing the thing I should have been doing for 11 years, being home. I gave up $700,000 a year for Tuesdays. I want you to think about that. Not because it was noble, but because it should not have taken a DNA test, a CPS investigation, and a custody battle to teach me that being home on a Tuesday afternoon is worth more than anything I could build on a job site. I already knew that. I just chose not to act on it until I almost lost the person it mattered to. In the spring, I brought Alara to visit my mother in Sun City. The three of us sat in Leona's garden with iced tea and the smell of desert sage and warm soil. Alara fell asleep against my shoulder the way she used to when she was small, heavy, and complete. The way a child sleeps when she is not worried about what happens next. Her shampoo was on my shirt. Her weight pressed into my arm. I did not move. Leona looked at the two of us and said, "No test changes what 11 years made." She had said the same thing the day I told her about the DNA result. Standing behind a screen door in June. But this time it landed differently. This time I believed it. Not because I wanted to, but because the proof was asleep on my arm, breathing slow, with her shoes kicked off in the grass, because she does that now. She takes her shoes off wherever she is. Because she has decided that wherever she is might be a place she can stay. When do you tell your daughter the truth? The whole truth. The part where she is not yours by blood, but is yours by everything else. Do you tell her at 12? At 30, or do you carry it and hope the weight is something you can hold without dropping? Here is the honest bottom of it. Part of me wants her to know. Part of me wants her to know that I found out and I stayed, that I chose her, that the choosing was the hard part, and I did it anyway. But wanting your daughter to know you chose her is not the same as wanting your daughter to feel chosen. The first one is for me. The second one is for her. And I have spent too many years doing things for myself and calling them love. So I sit here in the kitchen after she is asleep, and I ask myself the question I started this story with. I still do not know the answer. Is this silence a gift I am giving her? Or is it a shield I am holding in front of myself? I do not know. I may never know. But she is asleep in the next room, in a house where nobody comes in at night. Her shoes are in the hallway and they fit. The two small ones are in the closet, and I have not thrown them away. Someday she will ask. Someday I will answer. But tonight the house is quiet, and the hallway light is on, and my daughter is safe. And I am sitting here deciding whether silence is the last lie I will ever tell, or the first honest thing I have done in 11 years. And to you listening to my story, remember this. I spent 11 years believing that writing a check every month made me a good father. I confused paying for a child with being present for a child. And that confusion cost me years I cannot get back. Do not make my mistake. Do not wait for a crisis to teach you what should have been obvious from the start, that showing up matters more than sending money. And that silence about the things that matter is not peace. It is avoidance. This was never a revenge story about getting even. It started as one. I will not lie about that. When I first saw that text on Father's Day, every part of me wanted to tear everything down. But somewhere between the DNA result and the custody order, I realized that the best revenge story is not the one where you destroy the person who wronged you. It is the one where you become the person your child actually needs. I believe God put me through this so I could learn the difference between being right and being present. The hardest part was not the courtroom or the money. It was sitting outside my daughter's closed bedroom door for an hour, and learning that love is not fixing things, it is staying. If this story meant something to you, I would love to hear your thoughts. Tell me in the comments, do you think I should tell my daughter the truth someday? Or is some silence worth keeping? If you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. And if you have not already, subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. Some details in this story were fictionalized for storytelling purposes. But the message that choosing your child every single day is the